Okay, yeah, Omaha Coincidental. This came about a couple of months ago, actually, when my wife and I planned a trip to visit my son in Omaha, and he lives there now. Actually, went to Creighton University and graduated a year or so ago, and he now works for the railroad. And during the planning of our visit, I was looking for things to do and really hadn't come up with a whole lot. So, but it just so happens that a week or so prior to leaving, I had seen a coin, and I'll tell you about that in just a second. And that's the coincidental, if you will. So that ends up being the piece about the Trans-Mississippi International Exposition. And then I'll also talk a little bit about the Byron Reed coin collection, which is also in Omaha. And also a 1922 silver dollar peace dollar poison pin. So anyway, I mentioned that I had seen in an auction about a week before we were ready to leave a coin, and it piqued my interest because it described Omaha on it and the Trans-Mississippi Exposition held there in 1898. And yeah, it's a beautiful coin. It caught my eye immediately when I was running through the auction. And so I decided to investigate it a little bit. And we were leaving in a few days, so I didn't have a whole heck of a lot of time to do much of anything. But what I did find out in later investigations about the coin, at least, is this is the official medal of the exposition, SH10-1. And the obverse design has a pretty cool story behind it. So it's a composite photograph, and back in that day, photography relatively new, and composite photography was a new technique that was being used. And what they would do is they would stack negatives together, and they would then expose them all at the same time and generate what was considered to be an average, if you will, of all of them. And so they were using this to try and create a composite of the most beautiful woman from the region. The way they did this, though, was they had competitions, local competitions. There was 43 of them in the territory, and the competitions winner, they would send their entry into George G. Rockwood in New York, and then he's the one who created the actual composite photo. And there was a little bit of controversy, as you might think, back at that time. People were complaining that it wasn't fair, and then others were saying that, well, it appeals to prurient interests, and therefore, kind of a little scandalous, but nonetheless, it came off, and actually, I think it's a relatively beautiful depiction, and the coin itself is beautiful as far as I'm concerned. The reverse, it was designed by the exposition's chief architect. It was from drawings that he had sent to the mint, and then either Morgan or Barber engraved it, and it was a typical scene from that time. The savage Indian, hunting on the prairie and so forth. The date, 1848, refers to a 50-year anniversary of the gold rush and the hordes of people coming westward. I'll have a little bit more to say about that image on the reverse of the coin later on. So anyway, this is what piqued my interest, and so I started looking into the exposition a little bit and whatnot. Again, I didn't have a whole lot of time, and I actually didn't. I found a website prior to, but didn't have a whole lot of time to explore it. When I did, though, when we got there, I found a couple of maps. That website was put together by University of Nebraska at Lincoln, and it's a pretty cool website if you ever have an opportunity to visit it. But it's mainly a collection of photographs, memorabilia, documents, and so on. It's just jam-packed. But it doesn't really have a lot of description as to the fair itself, just some basic stuff. So I didn't know where it was. And one of the purposes of going there was to try and find where it was held. And from the pictures on the website, it was magnificent. And so we were kind of curious to see what had become of it. The map, though, gave us some clues on where to look. And if you'll notice on the right side of the map, there's a little area that says Cutoff Lake. And that's kind of the only geographical feature, but it proved to be enough. And I presume it was put on at that time to kind of give people a general reference. The image to the right also shows water in the lower right-hand corner. That's an artist depiction. It was used for sales promotions and whatnot. I think this was for the railroad and so forth. So as a consequence, what I did is I pulled out my phone and I started looking along the Missouri River, trying to find where there were cut-off lakes, and that would give me a clue. And so this is what you see. And the only cutoff lake of any significance is Carter Lake, and it's near the airport there. It's a pretty big cutoff lake. When I looked at it, I said, yeah, that's got to be it. Proximity is right, and so forth. Just to the west of that, there's a small park called Kuntz Park. And I figured, though, I must have been right kind of in the middle of where the exposition was. And if you take the map, like I did later on, and try and line it up, it actually lines up very well. So it's to scale, and the streets are labeled, or a few of them are labeled and readable on the map. And that then gave me the ability to go to a closer up image and take a look, and sure enough, everything's starting to line up. There's Locust Street at the bottom, 20th Street runs right through the middle, and so forth. So the red outline is the outline of the map. Doesn't include the cutoff lake, but like I said, they put it there, and I'm lucky they did, because it gave me the ability to find it on the map pretty quickly, actually. So this was Wednesday morning, and my wife and I decided after breakfast, well, let's go and check it out. So we took a drive over to Kuntz Park.
Could you define what a cutoff lake is?
Sure. So, rivers tend to meander, particularly when there's not a lot of elevation change. And so they'll meander and start to form loops and bends. And then when you get a huge rain, for example, that rain might then cut part of the river off as it overflows its banks and then continues on past. And when it does that, it creates cutoff lakes. I think they're fairly prominent. If you follow the length of a major river like the Missouri, you'll find a lot of them. But in the Omaha area, that was the only one.
Hey, so, thank you.
Kind of fortuitous, yeah. So in any case, the Grand Court, which is the central area of the exposition, lines up very well with Kuntz Park, and cuts off 12 or occupies 12 square blocks in northern Omaha. And this is just part of the exposition. I mean, it was impressively massive in scale, 2,500 by 600 feet, about 1.5 million square feet. And none of it is there today. So when we showed up, there was just the park in the neighborhoods, as though nothing had ever occurred ever there. And that kind of floored the both of us. And actually, my wife at this time, she was kind of dubious. I'm not sure I want to go along with this scheme. What are you getting me into here? And lo and behold, it kind of started to pique her interest. And rightly so, because when you look at some of the pictures on the website, this is the Grand Court looking west across the lagoon from the Twin Towers. There's 2 Twin Towers there at the colonnade. And at the far end, that is the government building. But in between is a lagoon that was one of the first things that was built. And all of it is very magnificent. And if you know anything, which I didn't really know, about the Chicago World's Fair, which happened 5 years earlier, this is kind of a scaled down version of it. The Chicago World's Fair was kind of more central at that time, more Eastern, and therefore it drew a lot more people. It was even more extravagant than this, but this was a patterned after, if you will. And this is in the daylight. One of the things that was really, really astonishing back then, I think at the time, and maybe hard for people to grasp today, is the lighting that was used. So There were 2.6 million visitors, and most of them had not seen outdoor lighting on this kind of scale. I did a little research and I found that about less than 3% of rural households at this time had any lighting or electricity at all. Everything was still lit by oil lanterns. So you can imagine arriving here and the use of electric lights was just astounding. They built their own power plant to do this with as well. It was quite an undertaking, and it was actually built in the course of about 18 months. The planning and everything else was about 2 years is all, and it was pretty. Oops, what am I doing? I'm going backwards. Here we go. Yeah. So the lighting was done at the top of these columns in the Grand Court, and the top of buildings as well, and you can see them there in a close-up. There's about 12 lights on the top there, and pretty spectacular, I think, for the time. I'll have more to say about that column and the top, the ornately what looks like stone carving at the top. I'll have more to say about that in a little bit. So this is some more views, architectural building from across the lagoon. The lagoon was about 5 feet deep, so it was significant, like a little lake there. And so they gave gondola rides around it to the people who showed up to the exhibit. You can kind of start to see also at top of the agricultural building, the sculptures that are up there as well, magnificent, as well as the flags and so forth. The Fountain of Neptune stood at the western end of the lake in front of the government building, and it was spectacular too. If you look at the top of it, it had a sculpture of Neptune, and just extraordinary. Here's a cherub fountain that sat on the side of the architectural building, and the same kind of thing. Nice sculpture there. Getting back to some numismatics, these were awards medals that were given out at the exposition. They were bronze and gilt bronze, and they were engraved by S.D. Childs of Chicago. And if you were, had a competition over at the livestock pavilion or whatever, then you could win a medal. And one of these was that one right there was auctioned just recently in an online auction, and it was engraved Elwood Cooper, and he won for olive oil, evidently. At the very bottom, you can see the S.D. Childs engravers of Chicago. This is the government building looking at the west end, looking to the southwest across the court there in the lagoon. And this is what it looks like today. So I took a bunch of pictures when we were there. This is again in late February, so it's still wintry, but this is looking toward the east from where the government building stood, and that little gazebo, whatever it is there in the middle of the park, is about where that Fountain of Neptune was. This is looking towards the west. That's the Fountain of Neptune at night. They lit that as well. This is what it looks like today. So the gazebo, again, about where the Fountain of Neptune was. And this is the Grand Court promenade with the colonnade and Twin Tower restaurants in the background. This is kind of a cool picture, I thought, because it shows what people were wearing at that time. And anybody been to Omaha during the summertime, it gets hot and humid, and they have thunderstorms and whatnot. And so the women are walking around with parasols and these dresses that probably are 115 underneath. But yeah, anyway, I thought it was a cool picture. But what's really neat about this, if you look at the ground, the pavers that were used. So what we found out was that the only inconspicuous remnant of the exposition are the brick pavers there from the promenade, and they were later used to pave neighborhood roads. And we were driving around a few of the roads, had those bricks still there. we found this out when we went to the next day. We took a trip and visited the Durham Museum there in kind of eastern central Omaha. If anybody has a chance to go to Omaha, you got to visit that Durham Museum for other reasons I'll mention later. But it has a great display exhibit of the exposition. It's got memorabilia and a mock-up of what the exposition looked like at that time and so forth. It's really well done. One of the things about the exposition was that just before it was to start in April, we went to war with Spain. That's the Spanish-American War. A lot of the promoters were fearing that that would dampen attendance and cause problems. Well, the war didn't end up lasting that long. I think they got the Philippines out of it for whatever reason. But in any case, hostilities were pretty much over by August, and so they decided to have a Peace Jubilee Week, and this was in the middle of October, and President McKinley would attend and speak on President's Day. That was October 12th. And there was a lot of other dignitaries as well. William Jennings Bryan, who ran for president 3 times and lost to McKinley, was there and gave a speech as well. He's actually, I didn't know this prior to this time, he was a native of Omaha, of Nebraska as well. So he was in his element in his own backyard there. But that day drew the single largest attendance. They had crowds that were estimated to be up to 100,000 that came to watch the speeches. So if you look at that picture way, way in the distance, it's looking west, you can see the dome of the government building. It's kind of hard to see to the left of the flag there, but of the other dome.
Interesting that at least back in those days, President's Day was synonymous with Columbus Day, October 12th. Now President's Day is in February.
Yeah, I don't know whether, I think this was President's Day just for the exposition. I don't think it was
so President's Day because the president was there.
Yes, yeah. So it was President's Day at the exposition, not necessarily for the entire country or as a reoccurring holiday or that kind of thing. But anyway, if you were in the crowd that day and you were looking up at the amphitheater and bandstand where all the speeches were made, this is the view you would have today. So just a nice little quiet neighborhood. This was the better part of the neighborhood. I have to say that when we were driving there, from downtown, relatively downtown Omaha, the neighborhoods deteriorated rapidly. By the time we were getting there, most of the shops on the corner were closed and boarded up, and the only thing that were open were liquor stores, it seemed like, and a lot of the houses were run down. Some of them were boarded up. Not a very good area at all. And when we got there and I parked, my wife kind of gave me a cross-eyed look because I'm not getting out. And so anyway, I did, and I went around, I took some pictures, and it was fine. There wasn't anything to be scared of, I don't think. It was just relatively in this day and age rundown area of the city. So I think back at that time I did read at the time of the and thereafter at the time of the exposition, it was an area where the wealthy in Omaha had made their homes. And so they would work in downtown Omaha, and then they would travel a couple miles north into this area, which was called Kuntz Place. And they had their nice palatial estates, evidently. They're no longer there, though. And for President's Day, they gave out these pins with McKinley's mug on them. And on the back, they have Uncle Sam and Miss Columbia. I don't know what Miss Columbia is supposed to represent, but evidently they're having a good time and they're greeting us. So when you're in the park, there are 2 plaques that are the only things that are left of the exposition. And those plaques have pictures of what you would see if you were looking from where the plaque was located. And in this case, you're looking west across the street. You're actually across Florence Boulevard at this point in time. as though you were standing on that balustrated island and the bridges that connected the two sides of the lagoon. This is on the west side of Florence Street. Yeah, and it's looking in the daytime. If you're on the other side of the street and you're looking east, then this is what you would see, and this is the night view towards the Twin Towers of the Colonnade. And it just, it's, you know, spectacular pictures, but it's really sad that there's nothing there today. A couple more medals that were given out at the art and industry area for the exposition. And I think that these medals were also available. You could buy them unhold, but they obviously hold them and gave them away as awards. Those medals, most of them, at least from what I could find out, were struck on this coining press, which was shipped from the mint to the exposition. And they did that at that time for most of the expositions. The mint would send something like this. For the 1915 exposition, I think that that's the one I know the most about. And all the precious metal coins were not struck there. They were struck at the mint. I don't know if that's the case here because they made silver as well as bronze metals. And I don't know if they were all struck there or at the mint. 25,000 though were struck. They were struck, or at least some of them were struck in the Treasury Department exhibit, and this was in the government building. If you look at that picture, kind of to the center right, that's where the coining press was. So it doesn't take up a lot of space, but from what I can gather from newspaper articles and whatnot, this was one of the big attractions, actually. It was very popular with the exposition goers. This was one of the another award that was given away from a hold official medal. And then the whole affair ended in fireworks on October 31st, 1898. And this was the view that you would have if you were looking at looking towards where President McKinley gave this speech that day on President's Day. That's the grand, looking across the Grand Plaza towards the arched amphitheater. And that's a domed arch amphitheater, which is kind of cool. You can kind of imagine the band there playing the 1812 Overture or something like that as the fireworks are going off in the background. And it was, I'm sure, very, very spectacular. But it all went by the wayside here. That's after, though, in 1899, they decided to bring it back for another year. It didn't fare very well. They didn't get great attendance. It kind of lost its luster. And therefore, when the exposition of 1899, that would be the Great American Exposition, ended, then by June of 1900, everything was gone, demolished. The lagoon was drained and filled in. And if you, it's very hard to find these pictures actually of the demolition. There's only a few on the website there. And then I found more actually at the exposition in the Durham Museum. You can see there in the middle, somebody standing on the lumber that's left behind. A lot of it was sold from what I can gather and was taken off and used to build other things or whatever was salvageable. Here's another picture of a demolition of, I think this was the architectural building that was being torn down. The thing about it is it was made to be torn down. These were basically intentionally cheaply built, and they were nothing more than elaborate barns. The exterior was made of lath and plaster, if you will. And at the Durham Museum, they showed how that was done here. But it was painted white on the outside and it looked very much like a stone building when it was done, and it was thoroughly impressive. So I mentioned that I also looked into where the drawings, if you will, from the chief architect would have come from. And I found this 1857 Omaha, Nebraska Western Exchange $3 note. And of course, the chief architect moved to Omaha in about this time frame in the mid-19 or 1850s, and so he very well might have seen this this note. And if you look at and compare the reverse of the medal, the official medal looks very similar. In particular, the horse is almost identical. The Indian is a little different, obviously, throwing a spear rather than with a bow and arrow, and the buffalo is about ready to get broadsided, but other than that, it's very similar. Found one other picture there, and it's also fairly similar as far as the posture between the buffalo and the horse. There were other medals from the exposition as well, although it was relatively limited compared to, say, the Chicago World's Fair, and then the later World Fairs in St. Louis and whatnot. But one of the ones that's kind of interesting and very hard to find, I pulled this picture off of Jeff Shevlin's book, or I think actually he sent it to me. The upper left one is of the Indian Congress, and one of the things that was a big draw at the exposition was the Indian Congress. They had, I think under the guidance of the U.S. military, gotten a bunch of Indian tribes to send representatives, and they held a big powwow there, I guess, and they would give demonstrations of dancing and so forth. But it was the fascination, I think, that people in the Midwest had with the savages that had, been conquered or whatever, and so that was a big deal. Buffalo Bill's Wild Buffalo Bill's show was also a huge draws through some of the biggest crowds to the exposition. The other three are the Floral Parade there, which is just a souvenir medal. They're relatively difficult to find as well. And then the Turn Festival there on the lower left, also rarer than the medal. And then the Arts, Science, and Industry, that's more common. Anyway, yeah, these images I'd gotten these from Jeff Shevlin and Bill Hyder. Okay, so this was before I found the Trans-Mississippi Exposition. I knew about the Byron Reed collection that was at the Durham Museum, so I definitely wanted to visit. I was happy, though, to find the Trans-Mississippi because I was going to have a difficult time talking my wife into going to see the Byron Reed coin collection, and lo and behold, she was very, very interested in the exposition and what that was about, and because they had an exhibit there that, I think she had a great time, which is good, and I got to see the Reed collection, which was pretty cool. So Byron Reed was a guy who moved to Omaha in 1855. This was before it was incorporated as a city, and he founded the Byron Reed Company, which was the first real estate company in Nebraska. And you can imagine with the westward push, this was right at the kind of the beginnings of the gold rush in California, that anybody willing to go out there and hang a shingle and make a living and were adept at it could really make a fortune. And that's exactly what he did. He became one of Omaha's most prominent and wealthy citizens. And as a result, I gave him some free time and resources, and he began collecting books and documents and coins. And he, by the end of the 1800s, had one of the largest and most renowned coin collections in the country. It was a compilation of, I think, three of the major coin collections of the time, and I think Mickley, a lot of material from Mickley's collection ended up with him. When he died in 1891, he bequeathed his coin collection and actually all of his collections to the city of Omaha, which I thought was kind of cool. And so they're all, I mean, it's there on display. They don't have everything, obviously, on display, but they have a lot of the cool pieces. And this was one of the ones I definitely was excited about seeing. The 1877 $50 half unions. And so I'd written an article about the half unions 2 years ago for the PCNS, and so I knew about them in detail, actually. And what's interesting is that they were actually struck 23 years after they were first proposed. If you read to the right there, the description, it says that they were first proposed in 1877, and the idea was to have large denomination pieces that banks could easily count quickly and efficiently. Well, that actually was the motivation, but that was during the beginnings of the gold rush in the early 1850s, late 1840s. And by the time the 1877 rolled around, there was no more need for these large denomination coins. So the 1877 half unions, whether they were struck in copper or gold, were strictly whim pieces. And they were clandestinely struck as well. They were not official mint issues. The two gold ones ended up having a rather infamous path, if you will, to the mint cabinet, and that's a story for another time. But the copper pieces, a few of them were released at that time. There was only one that appeared in auction, and the fact that Byron Reed got a hold of one of them is kind of a testament to his abilities and his connections at the mint and so forth. And of course, he had a lot of other coins that came directly from the mint that were patterns that were difficult to come by, and also were kind of clandestine. They weren't regular issues of the mint. The gold pieces, as I mentioned, though, their sale in 1909 for $10,000 each set a record and sparked the 1910 pattern seizure case. And I wrote another article about that, and hopefully publish it here in the near term. So anyway, that was one of the cool pieces that I would definitely wanted to see, and it was worth the wait. Another one was the fantastic $1804 that he had. So you can see that he had some of the rarest and most enigmatic pieces that were ever struck in the United States. This one was officially struck in 1834. It was for a diplomatic coinage set, and I always thought that that story was a good origin, if you will, of the shenanigans that took place at the mint, beginning in the 1840s, but more so in the late 1850s and so forth. But these did have an official purpose to begin with. They were struck as gifts for the King of Siam and the Imam of I think that should be Muscat there. I think I spelled it wrong. But yeah, in any case, there was no dollar being struck at that time. That didn't happen for another year or so. And so the diplomats insisted that there be one. And so the people at the mint took it on their own volition to create one. And they created the $1804, which was never struck in 1804. And at the time, there was 8 of them struck. They're called Class 1 specimens. And they were semi-official mint issues, if you will. This one was bought by Byron Reed at the 1890 Parmalee auction for $570. In today's dollars, that would be $500,000. But I think that in reality, if they were to auction this one today, it probably bring close to $10 million or so. So it's a pretty significant piece of American history. Its history, this coin's history actually is thought to have originated in 1845 when a lady purchased it from the mint. It sounds like a contrived story to me, but nonetheless, it adds to the intrigue. And the next one I'm going to show from the Byron Reed collection what is the 1792 silver half diem. And this was the first coin that was ever struck by the U.S. Mint in July of 1792, and the first coin under the Coinage Act of 1792 that was passed in April of that year. One of the interesting things about that Coinage Act that survived on up, I think, until 1933 was it had written into it the ability for the average citizen to take coins from another country to the mint if they were silver or gold, and turn them in, and they could then receive in return US coins. And so that was a way for the United States to round up all the foreign coinage and issue actual US made coins. So Thomas Jefferson, as we found out recently in an article on, I think it was money.com blog that was done, Thomas Jefferson, as a private citizen, was the one who first took $100 in Spanish silver coins to the mint. At that time, there was no mint building, but he took them to Harper's cellar. Evidently, Mr. Harper had done work for the mint and was an artisan, coinage artisan. And in his cellar, he had a coining press. And Thomas Jefferson took him the silver coins and he melted them down and made these half diems. That's the story that we know of now today, which is a pretty accurate description of what took place based upon his journals that were discovered in the 1960s, but not fully investigated actually until I think 2019 or so. One of the things that is described there on the display in Omaha is that they were made from silver plates that were donated by George Washington. That is known now not to be true. George and Martha Washington, that's known not to be true, but there's still pretty good reason to believe that the portrait on the obverse is that of Martha Washington. Whoever, I don't think unless some document comes along, we'll ever know for sure, but nonetheless, that's the story. So he had 1,500 of these beams struck, and he went on vacation, and he spent them all over that period of time. They were thought to be patterns, but because of these new journal entries that they found, they are now considered regular coinage. And quite a few of the 1,500, I think, still exist, but most of them are not in very good shape. Anyway, these are just 3 of the coins that were there. And I think they are only displaying a minute fraction of what actually exists in the collection. It's very impressive if you look through the catalog of them. It's extensive. I suggest that if anybody ever makes it to Omaha, they definitely check that out. That's on the bucket list, I think, for numismatists. So this was an unexpected find, and that's kind of why Omaha Coincidental is the term I use for the presentation. So we decided to go to the Strategic Air Command Museum, which sits south of Omaha. It's near Moffett Air Force Base. And this was kind of at the request, if you will, or a bow to my son, who is right now in the Marines, and he's going to learn to fly airplanes for them. So the SAC, Strategic Air Command Museum, was something he really wanted to know about. We had all been to the 2 museums, the Smithsonian and the other one there in Virginia. I can't think of the name right now. And what was great about this museum was that it's hands-on. So at the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum, you can't get very, very close, maybe 10, 20 feet from any of the aircraft, and they have presentations you can read, and it's pretty cool. Anybody should check it out. But the SAC Museum allows you to go right up to the planes. And in a lot of instances, they'll allow you to climb inside and crawl around the cockpits and really make a great day out of it. So that's what we did there on on Friday. Spent most of our day there doing that. But towards the end of the day, they had a bunch of exhibits up on the mezzanine there. And so I wandered up there and started to read through them. And I came across the exhibit of, what's his name? Powers, Gary Francis Powers. And he was a U-2 pilot that was shot down over the Soviet Union in May 1st of 1960. And prior to leaving on that mission, that fateful mission, he was given the opportunity, as all of the pilots were, to take this silver dollar with them. He normally turned it down, but on that day, he was flying a different plane from the one that he would have normally flown. His normal plane had maintenance issues, so he flew this other plane that was known as a backup to have be glitchy and have issues. And so he decided to take this silver dollar with him. In the silver dollar is a poison pin. It's coated with curare. And if he got shot down, he had the option. It was not a requirement, but he had the option to use it because they all were scared, obviously, of the horrors that might confront them if they were to be captured and sent to a Russian prison. So when he was parachuting down, he evidently recalled a conversation he had had with his dad about religious beliefs and the consequences of suicide. And so he decided to pull the chain off of his neck and throw it into the field before he was captured. That's the story that he gave. So this presentation showed another, evidently, one that they had but had not been used in the same way there in the presentation case. And it was 1922, nice piece silver dollar with the pin sticking out the side. And I thought that was kind of cool and unexpected to find something like that. I got pretty excited about it at the time. I thought, wow, this is great. I went and tried to get somebody to allow me to take closer pictures by taking it out of the cabinet and whatnot. And they kind of looked at me cross-eyed. And the reason for that was that it was kind of it wasn't a central part, but it was presented in the movie Bridge of Spies that was done in 2015. I think it was a Spielberg movie. And so it had in it a recounting, and it was a great movie. I ended up watching after I got back. But it had an accounting of that fateful day and him being shot down and the poison pin silver dollar. So he considered it his good luck charm. I can't kind of figure out how that works out. It didn't seem to bring him much in the way of good luck, but again, kind of cool to find that there amongst all the aircrafts, and it kind of made my numismatic day there, and also the trip on a whole. And lo and behold, I think my wife gained a new appreciation of coins and numismatics and whatnot, and so did my son, actually. So all in all, it was we had a great time, and that is my presentation. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Doug. That was very interesting.
Yeah.